I'm Dr. Phil, host of the Industry Doctors, and today we have Mr. John Fisher with his new book that he wants to tell the world about. We appreciate you coming on to our show, and we appreciate you continuing our conversation that we had from our show earlier about your book. Can you please tell us what your book is entitled and a little bit about it?
Yes, the book is The Unadulterated Universal Truth, and it's available on several sites at empower.com and at wordpress.com as the Unadulterated Universal Truth.wordpress.com, and also at John Lee Fisher Jr. at medium.com.
Thank you. And what inspired your book?
Um, I'm the son of a minister, fourth generation of ministers in my family, and my father made a promise that he would dedicate me to the ministry and spent a considerable amount of time educating me and preparing me for the ministry. And I developed problems in my life where I thought that the religion wasn't addressing the problems and the issues that I had. And I began to do sabbaticals and studies to address problems that I encountered in my life. When I originally started out, all of the information I gained was for my personal benefit. When I ran across a friend of mine who wasn't a very well educated individual, and that individual insisted that I should share the information that I was recovering. But at the time, I felt like it was for me, and most people would not be willing to accept the truth. And I'm just beginning to learn to understand why it is that most people won't accept the truth. And that is because our culture is imbued with Greco-Roman psych, emotional and psychological mind virus infection. Mind virus infections work similar to a cold, like a virus works on the physical plane. It starts with one individual, and then it can be passed on to other individuals, and that individual passes it on to the next one until it encompasses a society. Most of our problems with the Greco-Roman mind virus infection came because of the Crusades and the Inquisitions, where people were killed to foster erroneous religious ideas. If you said today, if you said back in Roman times the things that I say today, you could be killed. If your child went to school and said that my daddy or my mama said that Jesus was not a historical person, the whole family could be killed. They would come back and kill the whole family off. And this is how a lot of these mind virus infections started. I can remember once telling an individual that Jesus was not a historical person, that it was allegory. And that individual said, "Get away from me, lightning might strike you." And I gradually began to understand why people were afraid of the truth. It was because a substantial amount of time was killed. A substantial amount of time was spent killing people to foster these ideas. 1,500 years was spent on the notion that Jesus was a human being, when all the scientific and historical evidence establishes that it was a religious allegory. So people can't solve problems with the historical Jesus, but they can solve them with Jesus the allegory, Jesus the Redeemer, and Jesus the Savior. Patristic Christianity.
I'm not trying to cut you off. What is an allegory?
Allegory is a symbol for something. Like Jesus is the symbol for perfect and immutable law. Um, God is a symbol. The word God is a symbol for perfect and complete scientific knowledge,
Hmm.
and the Word of God is symbolized by the perfect application of perfect and immutable scientific law. For instance, the word prayer is misunderstood more so than any other religious situation because of the Romans conquering the known ancient world. They substantially were able to imbue these ideas into every religion in the world
So what
as a
about
result of it.
church? What about church as far as the word church?
The church is primarily a congregation, a group of people with one basic or similar ideas. So, a gathering of individuals um, for that purpose is generally referred to as a church.
Mm.
Now, the situation with prayer, in most situations that involve religions where the Romans were concerned, you will find that the Messianic Jewish community were the last individuals to accept um, Roman religious culture, or the last people that the culture was forced upon, and that caused the general acceptance of the religious idea. Now, we take the religious idea of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Solomon's the temple in Jerusalem, you can have what's called the Wailing Wall, where people stand there and pray at that wall. But that's not prayer. Um, that is meditation. Meditation is the saying of words to induce positive thought. And prayer is not designed to to communicate with God as we use it in meditation. It is designed to reprogram your subconscious mind to accept reality and to enforce ideas of reality.
Mm.
You can't communicate with God by getting on your knees and talking to Him like we've been trying to do for the past 3,000 years.
Mm.
The way to prayer is the movement of thought through the mind for a specific purpose, the application of the mind and the hand to scientific laws for the accomplishment of desired objectives. Now, I made an example of getting down on your knees and asking God to go to town
Mm-hmm.
um, is fruitless. But to sit down and get a map or whatever and use scientific principles to accomplish the objective of going to town is how prayer is executed.
And almost asking God to bless the trip as you travel safely.
Yeah. Yes. Meditation is designed to keep your mind in a positive manner.
Mm.
It is not designed to communicate with God because God does not hear it. I believe it is John chapter 9, verse 31. It said, God does not hear a sinner's prayer. And that is a meditation. A sinner's prayer is a meditation. And that's what that verse expresses. God does not hear it because it was not designed for God to hear.
Mm.
It was designed to reprogram the subconscious mind into positive, godly thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So how do we communicate with God on a daily basis?
Through the perfect application of scientific law. Perfect application of perfect and immutable scientific law is how we communicate with God. We ask God for things by going to the sciences to learn how to perfectly apply the sciences, which is prayer. We're confused about a lot of things in our religious culture. For instance, the word sin is the absence of accurate scientific information. But we have put on every kind of emotional connotation on the word.
So, in writing your book, how do we find the science?
By scientifically researching for solutions to whatever the problems were. I had problems with dealing with a lot of these things, but by studying and going on sabbaticals to study different issues, I was able to find the solutions. The answer to the question of prayer did not come to me easily, and it did not come overnight. Much emotional suffering went on in my life before I could understand what the meaning of prayer was and what prayer truly was. And believe me, much relief came from that information.
How much relief, Mr. Fish?
I'll give you an example of a situation where I almost died in a test that was being run by the intelligence community. For some reason, they were testing me for my commitment to certain ideas and certain principles when I was to be unwittingly poisoned. And when the situation occurred, I had cut the phone lines to the place I was inhabiting, supposedly to avoid being monitored by the intelligence communities. And I was offered an antidote in the varieties of foods with which I had been poisoned, and which was to poison me. When the occasion occurred and the phone lines were cut, I automatically panicked. And even though I knew that what I was about to do was not prayer, I almost died trying to enforce it. I got immediately on my knees as the poison gripped my body, and began to meditate. And even though I knew that would not work and would not save me, I continued to do it until I almost passed out. When something hit me and said, "You know this is not prayer. Get up and get up and find the antidote." When I started to look, and the first piece of food I touched was the antidote, I could have died that day, sitting there trying to use a verbal communication to communicate with God. And I have not been on my knees since that day because of that. Even though I knew I had spent almost 10 years understanding prayer as the movement of thought through the mind for a specific purpose, the application of the mind and the hand to scientific laws for the accomplishment of desired objectives. The desired objective at that time was for me to live, but I was doing psychologically everything but what was required for me to live.
Which was think about what could be the antidote and to try to
Yes.
solve the problem.
Right. These mind virus infections come down to us for thousands of years. They start in our lives before we were born. Thomas Jefferson was the only person among the founding fathers who had a patristic Christian background, and he forsook it for the Gnostic Christian faith, or deism, while a student at the College of William and Mary, and he was only about 15 or 16 years old. He said later in life that patristic Christianity was a cruel psychological hoax to be played on a human being, being played on a human being, and that the negative ramifications of which would take a lifetime to eradicate. And I suppose he spent a lifetime from 14 years old until his death trying to eradicate certain of these mind virus ideas, and had great difficulty getting that done. The situation with me and the prayer was an emotional situation. It was the way I had been reared to communicate with God. And I suppose at my death, even though I didn't believe that to be true any longer, psychologically, my subconscious mind had not accepted the new definition of prayer. And I immediately started to work on reprogramming my subconscious mind to accept this idea. And it's been with me ever since.
Knowledge is truly power.
Yes. And I solved a lot of problems that I never would have been able to solve, psychologically, emotionally, and physically. There are a lot of things that I'm able to do now that I never would have been able to do, or never would never would have been able to do, or never would be able to do without this knowledge. And it's very rare. A great deal of time was spent in developing the unadulterated universal truths. A great deal of time was spent analyzing to make sure that what we offered the public in the unadulterated universal truths would actually be the truth. Not how we felt about things, but the actual scientific facts. And I think we've done an excellent job of getting that accomplished.
Well, we would definitely want to thank you for coming on the Industry Doctors, and we would love to have you again. And what would you have to say? Because there's a lot of, youth out there that are opening up their minds and, like you're saying, doing the research.
Yes.
And they are inspired entrepreneurs and bookmakers themselves. What 3 points of advice could you pass along to them?
Well, the unadulterated universal truth. The unadulterated universal truth is made available at medium.com through John Lee Fisher Jr. at medium.com. Now, everything that the unadulterated universal truth has pretty much developed at this point is available on the Medium site. Now, Medium offers you two free visits to the site to visit any blog that we have there.
Mm-hmm.
But for $5 a month, you can visit all of our blogs and thousands of blogs regarding other issues. The Empower site, where we have 48 blogs, 56 blogs still left, will probably be taken down pretty soon. We're trying to generate traffic to the Empower site, but the unadulterated universal truths.wordpress.com site is still available and may be soon taken down. But it's a free site. It has 48 of the 56 blogs there, and we'll be adding more in the coming days, today and in the coming days. Some of the latest material that went to the medium.com site.
Well, we want to thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing your book with the world, Mr. John Fisher, sir.
Thank you, sir. Take care, Dr. Phil.